Welcome back to Beyond Defeat. I'm Kez. In this video we're going to be comparing the Brooks Ghost 13 to quite a few different runners. So this is Brooks's bread and butter when it comes to basically a shoe that can do a bit of everything. They've been doing this for 13 years now, bit of a workhorse. If you want something to do everything, something from gym, something to work up to a marathon, even a bit of speed work, you can probably look at a few other Brooks' shoes, but one shoe that does a bit of everything, your Brooks Ghost 13 by Brooks will definitely do that. So breaking this shoe down before we get onto a few others, this does run with a 12mm drop, so you've got quite a bit of cushioning underneath that heel, and it goes down to a 12mm stack height. So you got a 24 to 12, so quite a bit of cushioning underneath the heel, then it does kind of bottom out and gets you onto that next gait cycle quite quickly. So with the midsole, it does have a DNA loft on that lateral side, as well as a Biomogo DNA on that medial side. So with the DNA loft, it is their softest cushioning system, so they do have a full DNA loft in their Glycerin 18. They've accommodated the DNA loft in the Ghost 13 just on the lateral side. With that Biomogo DNA on the medial side, it kind of goes 2/3 in, and the DNA loft's that third on the outside. So it makes for that kind of snappy but cushioning feel. It's quite a weird sensation. You still got a nice cushioning on that lateral side. But with that Biomogo DNA, it gives you quite a bit back. So similar to a Nike React as far as the cushioning goes. We'll compare it to a Pegasus 37 a bit later on. You got very good midsole. You've got a ton of rubber underneath. It's going to be quite sticky in the wet, and the upper's pretty seamless. If anyone does have quite a high arch, or high instep, and find shoes that aren't able to fit their foot in, this will easily accommodate it. But very seamless upper, a lot of breathability as far as that forefoot goes, and a nice heel counter that locks in the foot. So firstly, comparing the Brooks Ghost 13 to the Nike Pegasus 37, I have done a full video on this, so if you want something that goes a bit more in depth of both of these shoes, just click on the link above. So looking at the outsoles firstly, both very durable outsoles. I'd probably say the Brooks is slightly a bit sticker, having that air-blown rubber underneath the forefoot. So if you do live in a wetter climate, I'd probably lean towards the Brooks Ghost, but both very durable. You're going to see a ton of Ks out of both of these, and yeah, you can't really fault the outsoles at all. With the Brooks, it's going to be a slightly bit flexible at the top, so if you do want your toes to flex a bit better, I would probably lean towards the Brooks Ghost 13. Looking at the midsoles, so you've got a full length of Nike React in the Pegasus 37, running with that 10mm drop, whereas you have that DNA loft as well as Biomogo DNA. So the Biomogo DNA is quite similar to the Nike React. As far as a more versatile midsole goes, I'd probably lean towards the Nike React if you want to do a bit of everything in it, a bit of speed work, a bit of endurance long runs. It does sink in quite nicely, but it is quite snappy when you put a bit of pounding down onto it. With the Brooks Ghost 13, having that DNA loft, you will sink into it a bit more, but it won't give you as much back as the Nike React. So if you do want that kind of bit more of a tempo shoe, something that gives you a bit more back when compared to what you put down, I would lean towards that Nike React. Yeah, both very good cushioning systems. You got a 12mm drop, you got a 10mm on that Pegasus, but you can't really go wrong with either. They're just kind of targeted as different runners. Moving on to the uppers, I'd probably say the Brooks Ghost 13 fits quite a lot more foot types, whereas the Nikes can be quite a bit more narrow for some people. I personally like both. I'd probably lean towards the Pegasus myself, since I do have quite a narrow foot and a bit shallower. As far as the more accommodating foot types, the Ghost 13 will feel a lot better. It's got a slightly bit more cushioning over beneath the toes, slightly bit more rounder toe box. So you've got a nice Achilles flare away on that Nike React. It doesn't hold as well as the Ghost 13 does. Both very good uppers. This can be a slightly bit narrow for some foot types. Comparing the Ghost 13 to the New Balance 880 version 10. So these are both very good shoes. I think the 880 version 10 is probably one of the most underrated shoes as far as a shoe that can do a bit of everything goes on the market at the moment. Breaking down the fit and feel underneath the foot, the 880 version 10 does use a fresh frame as well as a TrueFuse upper layer, so both quite similar cushioning systems as far as the feel goes. I'd probably say you sink into the 880 a slightly bit more than the Ghost 13. As far as the outsole goes, do have your endurance rubber in the heel zone of the 880 version 10, so similar kind of rubber distribution on the Ghost 13 as well. So you got your high abrasive rubber in that landing zone, and they do move onto that air-blown rubber in the toe-off. So very similar outsoles. You've got only one less flex groove than that 880 version 10, but both are quite flexible in the toe-off. Touching on the midsoles, as I said before, you'd probably sink into the 880 a bit more. We're using that fresh frame. They do use it in that 1080. Then with the TrueFuse, it just is that top layer underneath your forefoot, so you still do get that nice spring back on your forefoot as well. Ghost 13, Slightly bit more of that softer feel if you're more of a supinator. So if you do feel like you do supinate or roll out, this does have a slightly softer ride on that lateral side. But yeah, both very simplistic cushioning systems. As far as if you want a slightly softer shoe, I look at the 880 version 10, but both very good midsoles. Looking at the uppers, so the 880 version 10 does use a hypo knit. It's not as elastic as the 1080. Fits quite similar to the Ghost. I'd probably say it's slightly a bit deeper throughout that forefoot section. So if you do have quite a high instep or even a high forefoot, you probably look at the 880 version 10. It does have a very good heel counter on that 880 as well. Nice and deep, very V-shaped, and it does have an external plastic cap, so no irritation on that inside. Both very good uppers. You got a slightly bit softer upper on the Ghost 13, whereas this knit can irritate some feet, but it is seamless on the inside. But yeah, both very good shoes. If you're wanting a slightly more of a springier shoe, or not springier, something that does give it a slight bit more back, I'd lean towards the Ghost 13. If you do want a slightly softer ride, the 880 version 10 will work nicely. Moving on to the Saucony Ride 13 up against the Ghost 13. So both are number 13 and very similar outsoles as the last few have been. Having that carbon rubber in the outsole, then moving on to that air blown as well as a carbon rubber back in that toe off. So simplistic outsoles, both will handle about that 800 to 1000 Ks. They do have a slight bit more cushioning underneath the forefoot. Both very sticky in wet weather. If you're experiencing that, you can't really go wrong with either of these. Looking at the midsoles, so this is where the kind of fit and feel is a bit different in both of these shoes. You're running with the 8mm drop in that Ride 13, whereas Brooks Ghost is that 12mm. 12mm I do think is quite a bit excessive as far as a offset goes, whereas that 8mm is kind of that happy medium for everyone. And with the midsoles, this does use a full length of power run, so quite a light cushioning system, similar to their Biomogo DNA, but I'd probably say yeah, sink into the power run a slight bit more. As far as feel goes underneath the foot, I personally like the power run. It does sink in nicely. It does have a thermoplastic molded in with the EVA, so it's going to last quite a lot longer over the life of your shoe. You're going to still get that kind of same feel that you do on the first day, around that 500 Ks. My personal pick is that Ride 13. It just does fit and feel nice underneath the foot. Looking at the uppers, so this is quite a bit different as far as fit and feel goes. You do have a full gusseted tongue in the Saucony Ride 13, quite a bit shallower underneath your forefoot as well. So if you do want a slight bit of wiggle room with your toes, the Ghost 13 will do that nicely, as well as if you do have that high instep. But both very pleasurable. You've got enough cushioning there where it needs to be. With the heel counters, quite a bit more of a V-shaped heel on the Ride 13, so it's going to hug that Achilles a bit better, but not irritated at all. But yeah, uppers are very nicely dialed in on that Ride 13, and if you do have a slight bit more volume to your foot, or if you've got quite a high instep, I would lean towards that Ghost 13. Just comparing it to the Mizuno Wave Rider 24, so both running with that 12mm drop, ton of rubber underneath the outsole as well. The Mizuno is quite sticky, does have that guidance line running on that lateral side as well, so with that DNA loft in the Ghost, similar kind of thing that Mizuno is trying to do here. If you are a supinator, just guide you nicely throughout that gait cycle. And if you are experiencing plantar fasciitis, or even if you do have a heel spur, this does have a segment cut out there that doesn't put pressure right up into the heel, but does absorb your body weight quite nicely. You're going to get about the same durability out of both these, and they do have quite a high abrasive rubber in the heel of that Wave Rider 24. Moving on to your midsoles, with the Wave Rider 24, they just introduced their new cushioning system, the Mizuno Enerzy. So that is underneath their wave plate. So you get that nice sink-in feel to that Enerzy, and the wave plate acts as that springboard. So it is a nice, pleasurable feel if you are that heel striker and a neutral runner. Just get you onto your toes quite quickly and onto your next gait cycle quite nicely. And they just got a top layer of that euphoric, so acts as a slightly bit more of a springy shoe. DNA loft on that lateral side on the Ghost 13. Will sink into the Ghost a slightly bit more, so if you do want that slightly bit more of a softer shoe, the Ghost 13 will be a bit softer on that lateral side, but quite similar cushioning systems, that euphoric as well as the Biomogo DNA. You will get a bit more back out of them. But both very good cushioning systems. The Rider is quite a bit lighter as far as the shoe goes, since it doesn't have as thick of a stack height. Looking at the uppers, nice and breathable. You got a very nicely dialed in upper with the Wave Rider 24. They do run with a gusseted tongue, so if you do have that tongue slipping down to that lateral side, the Wave Rider won't do that. It will just stay centralised throughout your longer runs. Slightly bit more depth to the Ghost 13, and it just does have a slightly bit more of an area upper. Very similar cushioning around the heel counter. Probably say the heel counter on the Wave Rider 24 does lock in a bit better. But good lacing systems, can't really fault either of these uppers. If you just do have that slightly higher volume foot, the Ghost 13 will work a bit better. All those shoes I just compared, the Ghost 13 to are very good. Very good upgrades as far as what they've done to the midsole, having that co-molding with the DNA loft and the Biomogo DNA. Yeah, can't really fault any of those shoes. They're just slightly bit different fit, and you will get a different ride underneath the whole foot. If you want me to compare the Ghost to anything else, I have compared it to the Glycerin as well as the Pegasus I touched on before. But if you want me to compare this to anything else, let us know in the comments. But that's basically wraps up the Ghost 13, and we'll see you in another video.